One, two, three, action. Hi, Fons. How are you doing today?
I am doing great. Thank you so much for the invite. I'm excited to get to talking and being able to share and hear so many great things and talking about education and technology. And so, of course, that really excites me. And the fact that I get to be a guest on your show is definitely something very exciting as well. So, thank you so much for the invite.
Thank you so much. Actually, I stumbled upon your profile on LinkedIn. I totally loved it. I gave it a try. I got hooked on all the episodes. You've made so far. You made tons in the hundreds. How many episodes have you done
Uh,
on
we're,
education?
yeah, in the 4 years now, it'll be 4 years, April 10th of 2024. And there right now, currently, I have 268 episodes, but I have another five scheduled within the next 2 days also as well. So I'm almost getting to 300. So that's really exciting also as well.
So what? Okay, so let's start first by could you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Yes, absolutely.
You're from Texas?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. So my name is Alfonso Mendoza, but everybody knows me as Fonz, or I go by Fonz on social media. The name of my podcast is called My EdTech Life, which is something that I've been doing for 4 years now. April 10th of 2020 is when I first started doing the podcast, and really it kind of came from working with a group of global educators, and it's the Google Educator Group. It's GEG, a group that we were doing a lot of trainings, during COVID when everything closed down. So we were just streaming live continuously, and I got to be part of that and do some streams in English and Spanish, being that I am fluent in Spanish. So that really
I
helped
love the
out a lot.
diversity.
And so living in my demographic area, I was like, I want to do something here for our area. But then I figured, there's already so many people putting out so much great content as in technology. So then my kind of podcast kind of turned into the during that time, like, how are you doing? How's everything going? How are you leveraging the tech and talking about those difficulties and those obstacles, which I think was just very raw and very, emotional, because at the time people were going through so much, but nobody was really talking about it or amplifying those voices. So even though the podcast was called or is called My EdTech Life, during that time, it was still a little bit of tech, but a lot more of how's it going? What are you seeing? What are you learning from this? And then sharing those positives, but also sharing the other side. Now that we're kind of back in, brick and mortar and going back to schools and everything, now everything is really tech focused. And for the last year, it's really been a lot of AI integration, talking about data privacy in the K-12 space and on. And aside from that, I do have a regular 8 to 5 job. I do work as an instructional software specialist in a school district here in the southernmost tip of Texas. They call it the South Pole of Texas. So I'm right along the border there, and I service 14 schools, about 9,600 students, and it's just one of me, K through 12. So talk about learning how to be resourceful and managing your time and multiplying yourself in different ways. So technology is definitely a big part of that as well. And on top of that, too, like we talked a little bit earlier in the warm up chat, I am also a doctoral student and working on my dissertation in AI or on AI, which incidentally is great because with all the interviews that I've done, now that's become archival data. So my professors are like, you can just do your dissertation on your podcast. So right now I'm in the process of downloading all those episodes and coding them and everything. So it's been interesting, but I love it that everything has kind of come full circle with my passion for education and educational technology.
Awesome. So does that mean that your background is in coding, like or is it in math? I've read somewhere that you studied math at the beginning. Like that was the
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sorry, I should have been saying like I'm coding for a qualitative study, so not
okay.
necessarily coding programming, but coding my dissertation, where we find take the conversations, find some keywords, key elements in there, trends, and so on. So I should have been a little bit more specific. However, I did start as a math teacher. 18 years ago, I started off as a ninth grade algebra teacher, did that for 3 years, moved down to elementary for another 5 years, where I did fifth and sixth grade math, science, social studies. And then in my current position, I've been serving here for 8 years as the instructional software specialist. So um, definitely fell into education. I didn't want to be an educator at first. I actually have a business degree. I have a bachelor's in business administration. But then there was a fork in the road moment where I had to find more time for family. Being an only child, it's a cultural thing. Like I have a lot of responsibility to care for my parents. So at the time, there was some difficulty in health for my dad. He's well now, but during that time, I needed to find a job that would give me a little bit more time and flexibility. So sales and marketing wasn't it. I mean, I was working continuously, and then, but I moved into education very reluctantly. But once I came in, I absolutely fell in love with it, and I said, "Wow, the thing that I never wanted to be is the thing that I love the most." And really, it's just in education altogether, serving as a teacher and now working with my teachers and training them is definitely something passion or a passion of mine, and has really
Mm.
helps me grow and professionally and personally as well.
Speaking of teachers, over here across the Atlantic in Europe, like there's a big debate about the working conditions of teachers. They are underpaid,
Yes.
overworked.
Mhm.
I would like to get your like a quick maybe overview of how it is in the States, especially in Texas. I know like every state is
Yeah.
probably different from the other. How
Yeah.
does it look like in Texas?
It's very much like you would hear anywhere else. Now, I feel that in my area, we call it South Texas or the Rio Grande Valley. In our area, we really don't get as much funding as a lot of people do. Our demographic area is socioeconomically, it's not great. It's not bad. It's getting better. But once you move up 4 hours north of us, there's definitely a lot more money in those areas. And then when you move 8 hours north of us, a lot of those schools really the area that they're living in. I mean, they have a lot of funds. They're okay, a lot of resources, but here in our area, definitely a lot of work. The pay could be better. Obviously, there needs to be some changes in the education system itself to help with that burnout process, to help teachers really take some things off of their plate and not just take something away and replace it with two other things, but really take something away to help free up some time. So really, the condition here is very similar as you would hear anywhere else. It is very difficult. A lot of districts did receive some funding during COVID, but all that funding is gone. So now it's time to really manage and buckle down on really how to manage that money and get the most out of that to help our teachers, but also most importantly, it's also to help the students. But definitely, it starts with helping teachers first. I mean, you must have an educator that is taken care of in order for them to also be able to care for the students as well. So it's very similar here in Texas. It's really no different than what you would hear from any other state and maybe even overseas too as well. It's just those systematic changes. And one of the things that I learned, especially with technology, a lot of teachers are like, great, another thing and another thing. So I really try and help them out in taking away something off their plate that when I'm going to replace it with something else, it's going to be something that they can do more with it and, and feel less, I guess, pressured and less of a workload. So my goal is always to give teachers their time back as much as I can. So I'm very cautious with what we share with our teachers, also with what our districts buy, and now we're really weeding out some platforms that are not really being used or maybe underutilized, and we're kind of taking it back to the basics and really also having the teachers lead with the technology and getting a lot of feedback from them to help against that, I guess, tech burnout too as well that can happen. So we and tech
Tech
overwhelm.
burnout.
Yeah, so we want to make sure that we help them as well. But yeah, as far as funding and like I mentioned, the conditions very similar to what you would hear like nationwide here in the United States.
But this is very interesting, actually. You would think, whenever I think about the States, I'm thinking about OpenAI. Most of the tech, the biggest tech companies in the world actually are coming from the States, actually, which leads me to the question, why is it always the States and probably not elsewhere? Is it something, is it part of the culture, or is it the educational system that leads to that is it like, does it provide a fertile soil for innovation? Is it the curriculum,
You
or is
know,
it just the
that's
money and the power, like to be
yeah,
the strongest country in the world?
that's a
What
great question. And I see it as a combination of those things. The very first thing that came to mind, it's almost kind of like that cultural aspect of it. And I'll tell you just briefly, like my background, my parents immigrated into the United States, but because what they were told and what they were always taught is you need to move there, like to follow the American dream. This is the American dream. Like if you can go there and you have a house, you work and everything, it was kind of like you're going to get what you want and what you need. And that's what my parents always really just, told me all the time. And they worked hard. I mean, they weren't like, educated. My dad had probably like a second grade education. My mom probably had a first grade education, but I saw them work so hard. And so it was kind of that American dream of like, we're going to persevere, we're going to make it. And the fact that they did right by me and helping me just, raise me. And then, of course, uh, get into education, get a degree, and be successful and do those things. It's almost kind of like that cultural thing where now I'm like, yeah, of course, look the United States. I mean, it gives me all the opportunities in the world because that's what has been ingrained in us and instilled in us. So I think also the fact that uh, money, capital. There's a lot of investors. There's a lot of people here that do have a lot of interests within technology, and so I think that that really opens up that to making this area very fertile for tech innovation and innovators. And obviously, because there is money backing it, you can say, "Hey, let's go find the best people from
Right.
international, spaces, and
Yeah.
bring them here." And now they're working here. Now it doesn't mean that they couldn't do that over there, wherever, whichever country they may be in, but it all ultimately comes down to, I think, resources and that availability of resources at any given time. Also, I think maybe even just regulations are very different. I feel that here it's a little loose in a lot
Yeah.
of things as far as technology is concerned, and we'll talk a little bit about that, as far as with AI. But I'm hearing in the news too, the EU and a lot of the demands that they put on companies, tech companies, and even like Apple, like, hey, you need to remove this and allow for third party things and so on, that here Apple would never do. They're like, no, 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 this is the way we do it. But now if we want to sell phones over there, we got to follow their regulations. And it's not that it's bad. I feel that there has to be some control. But again, going back to your question, I feel that here it's kind of, you have a little bit more freedom.
Yeah.
Obviously, the capital is there too as well, and availability of resources too. So I think that's why you see a lot of that coming out of here.
Definitely, and I would add also the mindset, maybe the willing, like failing is not, we don't look down upon
Mhm.
people who fail. Maybe failing is more encouraged. Obviously, we cannot generalize, but more encouraged in the States, for example, as opposed to Europe. Like you don't want to fail. Whereas, I've heard a story. I don't know if it's true, but I have a friend who worked in Silicon Valley, and he told me that usually people would ask you, how many times did you fail? Or if you start a couple of companies that failed, that actually looked positively, it reflected positively on you, on your CV,
Yeah.
as opposed to maybe elsewhere here in Europe, to be like, no, you're a failure if you failed before.
Yeah.
Is it
And that,
something, is it true what I heard?
yeah, I think that's a very valid point. And, and even with some guests that I have on, or have had in the past too, they're doing startups and they have failed, the first time, second time, but they keep going and they keep going. And here it really, you absolutely right. It seems like there is, uh, that, I guess that feeling like this person is trying, and although that project didn't quite work, they see the resilience, they see that grit, they see that perseverance, they see the ability to improvise, adapt, and overcome, and just say, okay, that didn't work out. Let's go ahead and do plan B. And that didn't work out. Let's do plan C. But because of that continuous learning, and I think it's that risk taking aspect, you're absolutely right. Some of the most successful people that we'll see here in the US, it's not that company that you see them, that was their claim to fame, was never their first company, and it was never even their second company. It could have been like, their third or fourth, but the fact that they just kept continuing and moving forward, you're absolutely right. I think here we don't see your failure as something that is negative. It's more of, were you able to overcome? Were you able to be resilient? And then what did you do with that? And I think that's something that we definitely need to do a lot more within the education system. So I'm talking about this now through my personal observation, because I was always a teacher that took risks in the classroom. And
Mhm.
those risks, although maybe that first class it didn't go quite well, I adapted for that second class. And then what I learned from my mistakes from the first, I did better in my second class and then the third. And then I'd come back around to that first class the next day and say, hey, let me show you what I learned through the rest of the day to help fix this. So you take those risks. And like I said, one of the biggest things that you need to know, even in education, and I think it applies to the business world too, is just it's okay to not know everything. So
Mhm.
it's okay that you're not the expert, but you have that idea. And now, what are we going to do with that idea? We'll tap into resources, tap on people on LinkedIn, get on socials. And I think that now the communication, and with so many venues of communication, we have the ability to find and co-create something wonderful through the use
Definitely.
of social media, because you're reaching out to so many people that have that knowledge that you're looking for. And just as a matter of fact, this morning on a call that I had, somebody reached out to me, and I thought they were wanting to talk about just being a podcast guest, but they were actually pitching me like, hey, I would love to work for you, and I think that we would do great. And we were talking back and forth, and I was like, well, thank you. But the fact that they took a risk to say, hey, I want to meet with this person because they have something that can complement what I'm doing, and we can work together and do those things. I think that's wonderful. So I think we need to bring that a little bit more into education, and have administrators see that if an educator takes a risk, it's
Mhm.
not a bad thing. And it's not a bad thing if an educator fails at that lesson, maybe that one time. But it's like, are we providing them the space for them to reflect? And are we also providing them the help and support to help them,
Mhm.
just go back and say, hey, let me see how I can better this, and take it there from that next day and move forward. So we definitely need to do a little bit more of that for sure.
Yeah, it's important for the students to see their teachers fail, because
Yes.
that's how they will learn. It's okay, it's totally okay to fail, right? Like, and
Yes.
it's important for the teacher to tell his or her students, "Hey guys, I know it didn't work out. I tried my best. You didn't get it. Let me try something else."
Mhm.
Right?
Yes.
Because
No.
it's how you learn. You learn by observing.
Yes, absolutely. I can't even tell you how many countless times I failed when I was in fifth grade. My last 4 years in fifth grade, or 3 years in fifth grade. I mean, that's when I first had the opportunity to start going to tech conferences. And so immediately I would come back from a tech conference, and I just wanted to try everything. So I was throwing everything at the kids. And of course, being very methodical in what we're doing. And it was more about the coding and scratch coding and makey kits and hands-on learning. And so sometimes the lesson didn't go well, but they saw me fail. And I was just genuine with them. I said, look, guys, I'm going to show you the little that I learned. I was like, it may not turn out well, but we're going to go for it. And so when I completely bombed, you'd be surprised that the students would be like, hey, Mr. Mendoza, it's okay. Don't worry. Check out what I figured out. And then they would share with me like what they were able to do. And I was learning from them. And then they
Yes.
were learning from me. And I think, like you said, that's such a wonderful example for students to be able to see that although their teacher is the teacher, they're also a facilitator, They're also that guide on the side, but you're there to learn together and allow the students also that ability to try, experiment, fail, but then, adapt and then see what you can do. But it was a beautiful classroom community, because they saw me fail, but nobody was ever like, "Ha, you messed up," or even within themselves, there was never any teasing or anything if somebody did not do well, maybe on that particular project and things of that sort. As a matter of fact, it was more like, "Oh, let me show you how you can try this, or let me show you what I did to see if it helps." And it was just something very organic that happened, but I don't think it would have happened if they wouldn't have seen me fail and help
Yeah.
and see me just adapt to the situation, and then give them a chance to teach me something also as well. So that's the way I feel about education and in the classroom, and that's how I learned a lot. I learned more
You're
from
very
my students
unconventional, by the way.
probably. I think they
That
learn.
you're not the typical teacher. Like it feels like you're okay with not knowing everything, not
Oh yeah,
with you're okay with not coming across as the subject matter expert, in something.
yeah.
Like, and I think maybe this is the mindset we should have as teachers as well.
Yeah, no,
But this
and
will
I
lead us to talk about AI as well, because I feel like many teachers nowadays are actually
oh yeah,
terrified of the idea of having their students having access to AI, because then
yeah.
they feel like they're gonna come across as ignorant
Mhm.
compared to.
Yeah. No, and just going back a little bit, like you mentioned, I definitely was not the typical teacher in the classroom. I wasn't scared to take risks, and that really helped out a lot. And the growth for me was understanding that I, number one, am not an expert. I don't know it all. It didn't mean that I didn't go try and research and study and prepare. And even sometimes, even with the best preparation that day, the technology could not be might not be working. So then that it's like, okay, what's plan B? And you just got to improvise. And then, okay, plan B didn't work. Now I got to go to plan C. But wait, I didn't even have a plan C. So what are we going to do? But it was okay that the students saw that, because they saw me being resilient. They saw that they had an example of what it's like, that when something doesn't work out the first time, they can be resilient too as well, and that they knew that that it's okay, that we are all at different levels of learning, but that
Mhm.
we're all together in this in a community. And like I mentioned, there was never any teasing. There was never any like, hi, I did this or I did this better. I always saw that my students that were struggling the most were the ones that my other students were like, hey, let me help you. Like, what did you do here? Or let me show you what I tried. And they were helping one another in that growth process. So I felt more of that facilitator role, and I didn't have, and it took so much pressure off. I'll be honest with you, it really did, at that time. Now things are different, and like you mentioned, we're gonna get into that AI aspect of it, where, like you mentioned, I think it's something important that with AI, that teachers may feel like, oh man, like I don't know everything, and man, I'm really, I'm falling behind because my students can get these answers a lot quicker, or they're going in deeper. But are they really? So those are some of the things that we need to talk about. So I'm really excited about this next segment here that we'll be talking about.
Yeah, exactly. But actually, the next logical question would be, how do you think, in a nutshell, how do you think AI is going to transform the educational landscape? If, the other part of the question would be, what do you think of hybrid schools? Like we've seen it during COVID, like people, like some schools went totally online.
Mhm.
Nowadays in the UK, for example, some schools are, a few schools I've seen online already on LinkedIn even, are going hybrid,
Mhm.
meaning that, their students are spending 2 days at school and the rest of the week probably learning from home. I'd like to
Yeah.
get your take on all this, but let's start with AI and how it's going to transform the educational landscape, if it's going to do it at all.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question. Now, there is so much hope for AI to transform the education landscape. Now, when we say transform, like what is it that we mean? We need to be very specific, because sometimes there's a lot of words that get thrown around, like transform, innovate, equity, accessibility, and it's a lot of buzzwords because there's companies out there that need to make money off of their product. So they offer you like equity and this. And do you want to get rid of burnout? Let me show you how to get rid of teacher burnout. But an app is not going to get rid of teacher burnout at all whatsoever. It's really systematic changes that need to be taken place within the education system itself, starting all the way from the very top all the way down to the bottom to gets to the teachers and policies and just different ways of seeing school altogether. You know, many times we focus on the end product, but we never focus on the process. And the process in learning is sometimes you're able to see more about the students learning through the process of them submitting to you a final product. But oftentimes we don't care about that. It's just like, well, this final product didn't meet what I wanted, so I'm just going to give you the 70, the 80, or the 90, or maybe you do deserve the 100. But to me, that's really I care more about the process. So a lot of the things that I did in my classroom was everything was project based. And whether you wanted to turn it in a video, in a graphic, or if you wanted to turn it in writing, or even create a little small podcast, as long as you turn that into me and I can hear, see, or visualize your thought process and you're explaining a concept to me, then I already know that you've mastered this concept and you know it and you've internalized it in your own special way. Because I've learned from my students that if I teach them something, they're going to find a way that they within themselves are going to change the language and make those connections and so on. So now with AI, this is my thing with AI right now. I think that there are many products out there that are promising a lot, but they're under delivering, and they're probably going to under deliver for a while. Now, I'm not saying that they're not going to get better.
Mm.
It's going to definitely going to get better, but I think that right now the adoption is really fast, and we're not taking into account some of the dangers or the other side of the coin, which is the data and privacy, age restrictions, terms of service, and all of those things.
Sounds like
Right
social
now,
media.
yeah, social media. And because of social
Sounds like
media,
when we were talking about social media before.
yeah, and because of social media, these companies have grown, and it's like free, it's like there's a lot of free marketing because there's a lot of there's a lot of badges, there's a lot of certificates. I mean, you're certified words thrown around like, oh, pioneers, certified teachers, certified this, certified that, and so on. But what does it really mean if I'm going into your platform and I can just click next, 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 and you're giving me a badge, but did I learn anything? I'm just being part of the hype, but what am I really learning? Well, I'm just learning about your product. Now, the product, like I said, productivity, for me, these look like productivity tools that would work well in the business sector that are being put into the education sector, which I get, there is room for that. But one of the things too is it needs to be built by educators and in a very cautious way too as well, and really thinking things through. One of the things that I'm going to talk about is the data aspect of it. One of the things is there's a lot of AI platforms out there that are for education, but they use third party plugins and they actually plug into OpenAI APIs. So essentially this platform is a fancy wrapper for ChatGPT. So it's really ChatGPT you're working with, but it just looks different. So it's like, putting a let me see, what is it, a dairy milk bar into, maybe a Hershey wrapper and saying like, hey, this is different,
A bit
things of that
cheating,
sort.
isn't
Yeah.
it?
So then that's what my concern is that obviously terms of service is 18 years or older, but then they put it down to 13 with parental consent. Now, here's my thing is if we want to transform education, we should really talk to all our stakeholders, such as superintendents, state governments, but we also, most importantly, the people that we always forget is the parents, because when you hear the term learning community or stakeholders, it's like learning community, it's like going to be superintendent, directors, principals, teachers, and students. But we forget it's like who provides the students to us, it's the parents. So we need to talk to them and tell them about what is out there, what tools we're planning on using, but also letting them know what the risks are and giving them an option to opt out. But right now, there's a lot of educators that are out there that are kind of, because of that desperation of trying to alleviate maybe some of their workload, or trying to do things a lot faster, and they're using applications to, I guess, quote unquote, help the burnout aspect, but they're not informing parents like, hey, parent, I want to let you know that this is something that I'm using. And I even dare to ask, does the district know that you're using these platforms also? Because what if something happens with that child's data? Who's going to be responsible at the end? Is it going to be you or the district? Now, also a word of caution to districts too. There are many districts out there that will say, oh man, we really need to get on the ball. We're falling behind. Everybody else is doing this and we're not. And they suffer from that FOMO, that fear of missing out, FOMO. But I always tell people, this is not a sprint, this is a marathon. Take your time and be a cautious advocate. I want to give a shout out to Dr. Nika McGee. Also, if you follow her on LinkedIn, Moses, make sure you get her on. Dr. Nika
Yeah.
McGee,
What was the
that's
name
the
again?
first, Nika McGee. I'll share that info with you. But she's the one that I first heard that term used, cautious advocate, which means I'm not anti AI. I'm just very cautious because what happened in this last November when they had Dev Day, OpenAI, they made some changes. They provided GPTs. And so now you can create GPTs and you can create all these things. So a lot of those little mini businesses that were charging you $5 a month to read your PDF, they were charging you this much for a year to do something. All of a sudden, those businesses died out because now you can just do everything through GPTs and pay $20 a month, and you have access to create your own GPTs and do that work. Why would I want to pay $5 a month to somebody else when I can do all of this for 20, a month, and I get more bang for my buck? And then so those little businesses kind of, disintegrated. My biggest fear is this, is that right now there's a lot of businesses that quote unquote give you a pilot program. They're like, we're going to give you a little taste of what we can do, and you'll only have to pay us $2,000 for the year. Just give us $2,000 and we're going to pay, and we'll let your whole district get access to this platform. Well, what's going to happen is that now teachers are going to be dependent on that particular platform, because I can make a worksheet faster, or I can translate something faster, or I can change this into this faster. Uh, so then what's going to happen is when they say, hey guys, the pilot is up. So if you really want to use this next year, it's going to cost you $16,000 per school, not per district. It's going to be like 16,000 per school. Now, a school district like mine would not be able to afford anything like that. 16,000 per school, that's expensive for us. So then that's my caution there. Like, now you're going to have to really reach into your pockets. And what if you can't afford it? Now you've got disgruntled teachers that now they're adding on to that frustration because they don't have that tool that they wanted. So what are they going to do? They're probably going to pay for it out of pocket, which is now like $8 a month or 100 and something, per year. Why should teachers have to pay out of pocket to help support their students? And that's the thing too that I have an issue with. But going back to what I was mentioning is terms of service, a lot of those applications in the fine print will say, we do not keep any data, we don't do this or that. However, we do plug into third-party applications such as, and it'll mention like OpenAI. And then my thing is, they'll also put a little disclaimer there that says, if anything should happen, you will not hold us liable for anything that is data related, and this will only be taken up with our third party. So now you just paid me, let's say $90,000 for a 3-year contract. There is something that happens with data or a data breach, something. Now, as a district, I'm out $90,000. And legally, because I signed that paper, I can't come after you, the company, because now the blame is on the third party. Well, if I'm going up against OpenAI, I don't have any resources to go up against them. I don't have money to spend on lawyers. I'm a small school district. So now what am I to do? That is what bothers me the most, that I just don't like that type of shadiness, but teachers are caught up on the glitz and the glamour and the glitter of all that glitters is gold. But when something happens, that that's what scares me the most. And the last thing I want is just a lot more bad press for AI in education. I really want it to work, but we really need to slow it down. And I get it that it's a business. These companies that started up, it's the bottom line. They need to make money, but I think they're just going about it the wrong way, and they're doing it in the wrong way where they're really feeding into the, or going marketing towards that burnout, that teacher unsatisfaction. How can I make things quicker? The flip side of that, Moses, is the following too that I see. Oftentimes teachers will say, oh no, I know that I'm not replaceable. AI will never take my job because they can't do what I'm doing. But wait a minute, you're outsourcing your work to a prompt just to give you more of the same worksheets, more of the same work, more of the same. So you are outsourcing. So then what exactly are we doing? I know it's taking care of some of that menial prep work, but I don't want our teachers to get into the bad habit of, I'm going to go ahead and copy this standard. I'm going to put it into this platform, and it's going to give me exactly what I need, because it doesn't. You need to really take your time to see that this falls in line with your learning standards and the expectations for your state and for your district as far as what the child needs to learn. And I'm fearing that the art of teaching will be gone, where teachers will just be content deliverers and not be actual, kind of teachers, facilitators, helping students with discourse, helping them grow. And they're just going to be just, here you go. The first output, it must be right because ChatGPT printed it out, or because this platform printed it out. So just keep doing it because that's factual and I'm not going to check it. That is the scary part about it. And those are my biggest concerns, Moses, and all of this is that we're moving too fast. We haven't looked at the fine print. And teachers, I get it, we get very excited because we see people on social media that are using this and that, and we don't question why they use this and that. We just see like, oh no, they're at this conference, so whatever they say is gospel and whatever they say must be true, so we're going to use it. But you have to understand that a lot of people and presenters, they have skin in the game, I would say. So they have to say certain things, or they have to present certain things, because that's how they make their money as well. So we just need to be very cautious, and it's okay to ask the tough questions. Like I've been doing it on LinkedIn and I've been doing it on Twitter. And yesterday I posed a question like, hey, platforms out there, education platforms, can you please tell me how you work around, being having OpenAI as a third party plugin, and now you're putting this out to the students that are 13 years or younger without parental consent. Like, how are you getting around that? I had crickets. I had one founder from one application. His name's Adam Sparks, wonderful gentleman from My Short Answer. He would be a great guest here on your show too, as well. And they don't use OpenAI, they use AWS, and they do a whole other system. And he was open and transparent about it. I'm still waiting for the other apps to say like, hey, this is what we do and this is what we do. And I've even been considering throwing it out there to say like, hey, any apps want to come on and do a panel show with me, and we'll talk about privacy and how you're handling that, to see who would actually show up, to be honest and straightforward and open, because we need that. We need transparency. And that's what I fear, that there isn't enough transparency, and something terrible may happen, and more bad
Like,
press.
could you be more specific about, like, you talked about maybe bad stuff that could happen. You talked
Mhm.
about data leaks, but what could go wrong?
Okay.
Give me
So
like maybe like a tangible example of something that you.
yeah, so absolutely. Thank you for asking that. When I first started, when OpenAI first came out, I was still doing my main coursework before I get into dissertation. And I said, you know what? I want to learn a little bit. I'm just completely curious, like what's the good and what's the bad. So a lot of the bad things would happen is obviously when you've got that personal identifiable data and information. What can happen there also, you have this data, somebody's holding on to that data. What are they doing with that? Now, there is a term out there that's called data rentiership, which means it's like, okay, as an app, like for example, if it's free, yeah, that's one thing to think about. If I'm using an application that is free, then chances are I am the product, because they're not going to get just give it to you for free. There's got to be something in them for them. So they're getting our data, they're getting our address, they're getting names, they're getting this. What is our tendency? What are we doing? How are we clicking? All of that. And of course, they take all of that information, all those metrics, they give them to whomever it is their third party is. And then, of course, that's the way that they target us, for advertisements, they for anything just business related. All of a sudden things show up, on our phones. Sometimes when we're close to some place, it'll suggest something and so on. But to me, the biggest fear is that data is that they have their name, you have information that you're putting in. Maybe sometimes as a teacher, you're putting in specific student names and specific events or incidents that occur, and that's going into this database where this large language model is learning from. So then all of a sudden, let's say somebody overseas is using, this platform, type something in, and then all of a sudden get some information that they shouldn't be getting, something that is private, something that has something identifiable there, and things of that sort. So those are some of the things. And of course, the cybersecurity risk of those things being targeted specifically, malware attacks for districts, also even just predatorial things that can happen. Also, even just with a lot of the tools, students can be very, they try and push the line. And so,
Mhm.
for example, I'll give you an example. There's a certain app out there that works that has text to speech, and there's an application that says no, 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 everything that we do is student facing. They're never going to get any images that should not be inappropriate for a student or a child or so on. So I had a librarian tell me that there was a student that got very creative with kind of the prompts and so on. So he was saying like, "Oh, I would love to see a picture. They just said chicken breasts, like a chicken breast, like
Yeah.
filleted or chicken breast and
Yeah.
so on." And then all of a sudden, there was some pictures that showed up that were not very
Graphic.
appropriate. So that is a concern too, that if we've noticed in the news what happened with Google and the types of pictures that were coming out, imagine that you're having students at a young age putting in prompts or searching things up and are they're getting pictures that, number one, probably could be not age appropriate, but also could be incorrect historical data and facts. And so that's a lot of the things there too as well that can be very dangerous when students are using it and they don't have those critical thinking skills to say, maybe this isn't correct or this doesn't seem right, because now the habit is going to be is, hey, that ChatGPT said it, so it must be correct and accurate. So those are some of the things, but to me the biggest one is that data rentiership, where companies will take your data unknowingly or even unwillingly because they are plugged into that app, as a third party, but they have to pay somehow. So now it's like, you're going to pay us with that data, and they pass on that data, and now they have information on you that could be used in various ways. And imagine if that also were to get into the wrong hands. Now it could be used in nefarious ways to be able to get
Harassment.
to you and get your information. Harassment, cyberbullying, things of that sort, extortion, and countless others that can happen. So and again, this is for me being in education. I was one of those teachers that was very excited, and I still get excited. And the things that I do for myself first and experiment before I even present anything to teachers. But I am always one of those that anytime I download something new on my phone or an app, I don't even read the terms of service. I just go click next and download and so on. But now, within the last year, I am very cautious and really take a little bit of time to read the fine print and understand, okay, what is my data going to be used for? How is this going to affect me in the future? How may it affect me in the future? And all I'm saying is it's okay to question, and it's okay that sometimes, you feel that we may be combative because you feel that we're saying don't use it, don't do this. We're just saying be a very cautious advocate. We know that AI can transform and will transform education, but we just need to take our time and really see things through and see if we can come to a consensus, because right now there's states that are coming up with their own regulations and so on, but then now that changes from state to state, and it could even change from city to city and so on. So it would be great if there was like an overall umbrella policy. And I was reading an article that was shared with me on LinkedIn. Actually, it was the UNESCO guidance for generative AI in education and research, which is very interesting. And I see that in the EU, seems like they do a lot more for
That's what they do
protecting,
best. Regulations.
yeah, and regulations. And to me, I would feel like, okay, that feels safe. But here it just seems like, no, 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 we got to get it out there because we got to make that money, and it's a cash grab, and we got to do as much as we can before something happens, and then we move on to the next project. So those are some of the fears that I have, honestly. And going back to also your second part, the hybrid schools. For myself, I know that education needs a revamp, and one thing that I have learned, and I'm openly honest with a lot of educators, is that many students learn from in multiple modalities. There are some students that don't mind going to school every day, 5 days a week, to go and network with their friends and hang out and so on. But I think that with schools, there's a lot of fluff sometimes, which means a lot of extra curricular activities. And I don't mean that students shouldn't do those, but there are some students that don't want to participate in drama club, or they don't want to participate in sports. They don't want to participate in anything at all whatsoever. They just want to go to school, maybe just get their core knowledge and classes that they need, and that's it. I'm done. I just want to turn in my assignment, and then they
Some
work on,
guidance.
yeah, and then they work on their passions, what they're passionate about, and do those things. So I'm a big proponent for schooling in the way that it works for you. If there are schools that offer a hybrid model, to be honest with you, there would probably be uh, probably like either an application process, or maybe there would be some sort of kind of like weed out process where the students that will start, maybe they say like, hey, this isn't for me. But it's okay that it's not for you. There is another option. If you like the 5 day a week school, you can totally do this. But now you have an option for those students that say, sir, ma'am, I just want the core knowledge that I need for science, social studies, reading, language arts, whatever class I'm taking. And then I just want to be done with this because I want to pursue my passion in video game design, or maybe there's something else that the school doesn't offer that they have to find elsewhere. And
Yeah.
and that's okay. If they come to school for 2 days out of the week, they get to come, they still, make friends, they see their teachers offer guidance, there's discourse, there's discussion, there's probably submitting projects, things of that sort. And that's okay, 2 days out of the week if it works for them. And also, obviously, too, it's important that the family too, it's going to be, if it's easy for them, they have the resources for that, well, by all means. For me, I always say the best way that you learn is the one that you're the most comfortable with. Now,
Mhm.
obviously, here in the United States, it's different. You have to come to school. There are some schools out there that you can apply to and so on to be able to do everything online. But it all comes down to resources too as well. I mean, many times students come in and that might be the only meal that they get that day. So they come to school because of resources. There's not enough funding. You know, parents may be a single parent. We don't know what the situation is. For a lot of them, it could also be the safest 8 hours that they have in a day, and that's a harsh truth. I mean, there was many times working with fifth grade students, my heart would break, and I would say, guys, when you come to school and for these 8 hours, I I know that things at home might be tough, but I want you to be a kid here. I want you to be a kid. You're not that 10-year-old that's expected to act like a 15-year-old right now. Right now, I just need you to be a kid, have fun, smile, enjoy, laugh, run around like any 10-year-old, 11-year-old would. And then I would just tell him, but when you go home and things get tough, just go home, finish your homework, or do whatever it is you need to do for another class. Because I never gave homework, but if you had homework for another class, finish it real quick and just go to sleep. Whatever it is that you need to do, and then when you come back, you're just you. You're 10 years old. You're back. You're here. You're in a safe space, and you have fun. So it's very difficult, but as far as like schooling, if you come from a family that can offer those resources and there's that availability there for you, and that's the best thing for you to learn, by all means, I'm all for it. And there's nothing wrong with change. There's nothing wrong with doing things a little bit different. I know people may always say, oh, well, they only come to school 2 days, like what can they possibly be learning? Well, those students could be those self-driven students. If they're in a classroom, they're probably the student that finishes first and is just sitting there, and now they're bored. And the last thing you want is a student that is not engaged, that later on, because of that non-engagement, maybe they start being disruptive. They start just whatever the case is. But if this works for them, I'm all for it. Education is education. And the best thing to do is that, you're getting it and you're moving forward and you're going to continue to grow. So again, I think there needs to be some thought to in the way that we do things in school, and maybe even kind of different programs within that school day, to help every single learner and in a way that is helpful to them. So those are just my opinions there.
But I totally loved what you said before about project-based education as well.
Mhm.
I think many kids could use this approach to learn things. I mean, if you want to talk, if you learn, maybe some kids who are interested in video games could learn about history through video games. You know,
Absolutely.
and instead of just having to sit down and memorize a bunch of things that you forget afterwards in one way.
Mhm.
And this is also to tap into what you were saying before about all those AI, like the dependency of some teachers on AI to generate worksheets. This is also dangerous because it's like you're now following the guidelines of another tool. So before we took our curriculums from the government, like the education ministry, now you're just following other, like, not a different government, the AI government. But also, speaking of which, I never understood why would people go to the interfaces that are based on ChatGPT instead of going to ChatGPT and customizing a GPT
Mhm.
themselves. Like,
That's a
do you even know, have you ever talked to anyone about this?
yeah.
Because to
Okay.
me, it doesn't make sense, like paying money when you
Yeah.
could have like a school account, even a OpenAI account for nothing, for $100 for like
Yeah.
group account.
Mhm.
Like, why would they do that? Any
Yeah.
idea?
Yes. Well, okay. So thank you for saying that, because that's something that I wanted to go back and touch base on. So, okay. GPT, it's open for our district and it's completely free for the teachers, so they have 3.5 open. They can
Okay.
go in there. Yeah, 3.5, it's free for the teachers. They have it open. They don't have it open for students. Obviously, our CTO, he's really, buckles down on security. And again, he's one of those that's a cautious advocate. So it's okay. So we open it up for our students. I mean, excuse me, I'm sorry, our teachers. Scratch that, not students. It's only our teachers. So they work with it. Some teachers are using it. Some teachers are finding out like, wow, this really helps me with productivity, even if it's just for emails, if it's just for certain things. And then I started teaching them like, look, You can use a standard, here from Texas, but we need to be very specific to customize it for the needs for our student population and what we're working on here in Texas. And so I have been working with teachers in doing that. Now, why the question is, why do they not use that free version and they use this other version that is out there? Okay. So really what it is, it's just those platforms are basically saying, like you mentioned, that AI government, it's like, we can do AI better than you. And it feels almost like they say, and I'm quoting Kip Glazier, also, who's on LinkedIn, who is a guest of mine, that those applications or platforms are pretty much saying, I can teach better than you. So use me and I will go ahead and do everything for you. And so she calls it, quote unquote, and again, I'm quoting Kip Glazier, who's an amazing guest. She says it's a form of tech chauvinism, where they're just pretty much telling you, I can do anything that you're doing, I'm doing it better. However, I'm going to be honest with you. I have used a certain platform that is really big right now. And then I matched it up with obviously 3.5. Now, because they have pretty much essentially, I think, and because I've never looked into how they have every little thing that they do, but to me, it just seems like they're custom little GPTs for those
Mhm.
certain things. But when I've put in, a specific standard and this is what I'm looking for, what it gave me was not what I wanted, or it was very, very generic and watered down, because you're just putting in the prompt. And even though you put in the standard, all it's doing is just stringing the best words that it can together to help give you something that it's like, oh my gosh, wow, look at it. It did it instantaneously. So I matched it up with just 3.5. And with 3.5, the fact that it's free, number one, I always say, if it's free 99, take it. Obviously you're going to have to sign in with your account, but you're the one that's assuming that, if anything were to happen, it's just you, it's your data, but be cautious with what you put in there. But the fact that you're using the free version and it gives you an output, and now you can customize it a little bit more. So as soon as the prompt comes out, your output is there. Now you can say, okay, I like this part, but please make sure you change this and so on, and you're more specific. Now you're reworking it, you're molding it, where the other application will give you and spit out that one instance. And then now it's like, okay, can you add this and do that? And now it's like, okay, it'll add it, but it's still very watered down and it's not quite what you're looking for. So why is it that teachers are using it? It's because of the marketing. It's the marketing, it's the ease of use, or that perception of, I can do it faster for you, just use me, put your prompt in, and I'm going to give it to you. And that's, like I mentioned, going back to that fear that teachers are just saying, okay, I'm just going to copy and paste this standard. Oh, okay, gave me this. Perfect. This is what I'm going to use. And I'm going to go ahead and give it to the student, and I'm already done. And there are always TikTok videos that'll say, oh, in less than 30 seconds, I already have a lesson plan. In less than 30 seconds, I was like, yes, in less than 30 seconds, you do have an output. But have you looked through that output, and how long did you take to actually read through the output to make sure that it's something that is aligned? So again, it's that marketing playing on your, we're going to give you time back, we're going to make things easier for you, we're going to help cure your burnout because we can do this, and now you can multiply yourself over, and we'll do the feedback for you, we'll do this for you, we'll do
Fast
that for you.
food,
Exactly.
right?
And
This is actually
now,
fast food for yeah, for
yeah,
teachers.
and yeah, because it's really like a fast food menu. Like you just
Yeah.
click and it's like, okay, there you go. And now what? And just think about it. Fast food is great because it's convenient, but if you keep doing it and doing it and doing it, it can't be very healthy. And I'm talking about the fast food, but I think that that goes along with the AI, that the more you do it, the more you're going to be dependent on it, that after a while, is this me, or is this the AI that's creating this? And it just kind of like, I feel like one day the line is going to blur for a lot of teachers, and they're just going to kind of just continue going and rolling with this, just giving that information and that art of teaching, that art of storytelling, that art of engaging students, that art of critical thoughts and thinking and discourse will be gone one day. And now it's just insert topic, output, submit, or give it to your students, and that's it. And that's what scares me too as well.
But that's why I think even using when we think about safety, we should also look at the way you use safety can also be part of how you use AI. Because safety means as well, how can you keep your mind sane and trained? You know,
Yes.
the process like prompting, like I've been using AI for over a year now, and I feel like OpenAI, not the
Mhm.
interfaces, and I feel like I've learned a lot even about myself, my ability to ask questions. Because depending on how you ask questions, and I feel like, and even like I have two daughters, 7-year-olds, old daughters, and sometimes when they ask me tons of questions, obviously, and they think that I know everything, and I keep telling them I don't know everything, but we can ask a question, and um, depending on how you ask the question, you can get one answer or the other. So, and you keep, fine tuning your questions because, till you get the answer based on your question. So maybe, so it's a process, and a process is important. So I think it's important for the teachers, but also it's important for the students who are using AI under supervision of teachers.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with you on that too as well. I think that in the year, actually I've been for about 2 years, even before OpenAI, I was already using, like, it was called Jasper, and then I think they changed the name and so on. So for about 2 years I had been using these products. But you're absolutely right, it's your training, and you have to be very cautious with the way you word things, but it does help you learn, like, oh, okay, like I just learned how to do this prompt. I need to ask it in this way, or I need to ask it in this way. And of course, there's countless people out there that put stuff out, like try this for your prompt or try
I
this.
know.
And I'll take some of those little itty bitty things and so on. And some of them I'm like, oh, wow, like that really made a difference. It made a huge difference. And I agree that I think using just the regular tool, even if it's 3.5, it can really help you stay sharp, because based on the output, you're seeing that and say, okay, now how can I reword this or rework it to give me exactly what I want? And it may take, 2, 3, 4 times, but you're continually growing and moving and excuse me, continually growing and improving not only your prompting and the questioning skills and the way that you're inputting, but also your output is going to get better. And I agree with you. That's something that we need to make sure that we share with our students as well, when it's safe enough to do it for them at that given age. And also the AI literacy, to make sure that the first thing they see, they don't believe, that it's okay to question, to say, hey, is this legit? Is this not legit? But that's where the teaching comes into play. We need to make sure that we're teaching the content and as the way it is in the factual aspect of it, and then using the AI or those worksheets as a supplement to help, your teaching of that knowledge that the students need to acquire. Don't just depend on GPT or your that platform to create everything for you, and you just give it to your students and you say this has got to be right, because keep in mind that it's not completely up to date. I think Claude was is up to date till August 2023. I think that OpenAI is just slightly behind by like 2 months of 2023. So not everything is up to date. Also, the other thing that is very scary too is, and I'm gonna have Tom Mulaney on my show on Monday. When teachers do the let's talk to a dead writer or a dead philosopher, you know that it can be very scary, and there's some issues with that too that I have, but that'll probably be for something like a later show. But we're using AI in what we think are innovative ways, but if you think about it, it's very dangerous in that sense, because the AI it's within a black box per se, and it doesn't have like what's out there right now and all the ideas and so on. It's really that black box, and it's just stringing along things and comments that are the most fit based on that pattern that it does. So it's like a fanciest word predictor, linear equation. And sometimes we're giving it too much credit to say that it's 100% accurate. It's not. And we need to be cautious with that when you're having these conversations with these authors or that have been deceased, or these scientists or these historical figures. Are they really spitting out facts, or is it just stringing along a really nice conversation based on the patterns and based on the words that it's recognizing and seeing? So
And based on what
caution,
you
caution
said,
there too.
yeah, definitely. And no, you're right. Do you think we should have a chief tech officer over here in Europe? Like most of the teachers I know and worked a lot with teachers actually are not tech savvy. Like just, you don't even like OpenAI, for example. Like I'm sure some teachers here in France or in Europe today, some of them don't even know what AI is. Like you tell them AI and they haven't caught up. Do you think in each school now, given how the pace, how quick things are going, do you think we should have a tech person, somebody in charge of tech in each school, like
Yes,
to make sure that
absolutely.
who is adopting the best tools?
Yes, absolutely. So, for example, here in the US and even in my district, like for my district, we have what we call a CTO, which is the Chief Technology Officer. But really the job there is to making sure the infrastructure is everything's working as far as network, that the students have devices, that the teachers have all the devices that they need and so on. But what I do recommend is that there's always somebody else that's just going to focus on the educational applications, that are out there in the platforms. The person that is really doing the research to make sure that what they do present to the CTO, to the curriculum department, to the superintendent, or maybe in Europe, I know that they have trusts, to whomever's going to be presenting to the head or the lead of those trusts, is giving them the most up-to-date information. And I know that this technology is moving really quick, but there has to be somebody that is dedicated to help make sure that things are in line and in order. And should there be any issues with security and so on, that they're advising and being transparent to say, hey, we got to think about this. Maybe we need to pull this back because of this concern and so on. Because right now I know that a lot of the efforts obviously have to go to students. We need to make sure that, and taking care of teachers as well. But in order to take care of students and teachers also, and to make sure that everything's running right, you definitely need to have a dedicated person at a school or a trust or a campus that can help mitigate any issues with any platforms, whether they be AI or not, and also build those partnerships should there
Mhm.
be a platform that is worth using and extending. Building those partnerships is important. So yeah, I completely do suggest that there would be somebody dedicated to that solely, and to help support teachers and obviously the stakeholders, superintendents, and so on in that aspect. Now, like you mentioned, in schools there in France, maybe there are teachers that are familiar with the technology. Maybe somebody like in my current role, they call, my title is instructional software specialist, but really it's equivalent to what you would call maybe like a digital learning coach. And many districts here have different names for that position. But somebody that can come and provide professional development to teachers to help them and kind of just open up their eyes to the technology that is out there, some of the use cases, walking them through slowly, gradual release, knowing who your teachers are and seeing, okay, who are my top early adopters. They can be also, an extension of you to help, answer some questions to the teachers that are there on that campus, and you start building that community. And I think that's something that's very important, that I know here teachers don't get. They may get a lot of professional development, but sometimes they don't get the professional development they need or want. But over there, I think there's a lot of opportunity because, like you mentioned, there's a lot of teachers that may not be too open to technology yet. So I think that that is fertile ground. And if you were to put somebody like myself or many other of my friends in that position, I think we would have a field day because we're starting off fresh. We're starting from the beginning and we're helping teachers out. But the purpose would be to help them grow and see how obviously they can find some efficiencies in their workflow, but most importantly, how it's going to enhance their teaching, and so they can see not only the return on instruction but also the return on investment on that CTO side as well.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. Maybe tech can help them skip the monotonous, the tedious, like, tasks. Like Evan
Mhm.
Harris, one of your guests that I had on my podcast, he was talking about, repetitive tasks can be
Mhm.
maybe avoided by implementing some, AI, so you can focus on what you do best, maybe soft skills,
Mhm.
working with the kids and all that stuff. Educators and parents, how do you recommend parents, for example, select the most effective platforms for their kids and for their students? Like, how do we know with all the platforms out there, especially the AI platforms? We've already said, okay, we shouldn't use them. Now, if we go to the source, we have Google AI, we have uh, OpenAI. What should we like? What's the difference between the two platforms? Are they the same? Like, what do you personally use on a
Yeah.
daily basis?
Well, for me on a daily basis, I'm a chat GPT guy.
Yeah.
That's what I use on a daily basis. I've been playing around with Gemini too as well. And then I use Claude. Claude I use more for I guess my not necessarily professional writing, but more for the research aspect of it. Because I can upload a PDF and then I can ask it questions and then it's going to help me find. So that's more for like dissertation writing and things of that sort to help me in that tool. But for my everyday, it's always like Chat GPT, Google, and or Gemini. I have that available too. But here's my thing now. For parents, it's very hard to navigate this space because for a lot of parents also, maybe they're not too tech savvy, maybe some are. One of the biggest things that I always tell parents is we need to make sure that parents also have resources available to them. I think schools need to do a better job at bringing in parents for maybe some sessions to so that parents know, okay, what are the applications that my students or that my son or daughter are using in school. I want to know what they use for reading, for math, for science, and so on. So that way, as a parent, I'm informed that when I see my child on a phone and they're on a particular app, I know that, okay, they're working on math homework. Oh, okay, they're working on, reading homework and so on. So, number one, I think schools could do a better job at getting those meetings with parents, providing information and resources that they can have to help equip them so they can have those conversations at home with their child. So whether the conversation is going to be on digital citizenship, on what to post, what not to post, how to take care of yourself on socials, cyberbullying, and all of those things. And now with AI too as well, it's definitely something great to have those conversations. Now, students, and parents may not realize, and even parents may not realize how often they use AI because now on your phones, I mean, when you're typing in a text message, it predicts the next word or it spells the next word out for you. When you type in a Google search, it's already predicting what it is that you're trying to push. So without them knowing, they're already using AI, and students are using this every day. And they're using these algorithms when they say, "Hey, Alexa, turn off my lights," or "Hey, Google Maps, help me find this," and so on. So they're already using it. Now it's a matter of helping them connect it to the education space. So, for parents, just my best advice for them is be knowledgeable of what is out there. You don't have to know it all, but know just some of the main points for some of these applications. If you can, also look through your child's phone. At the end of the day, I always tell the parents, you're the ones that pay the phone bill. So you should be able to look at your child's phone just to see what applications they have as far as AI is concerned, or other apps that might be or deemed maybe a little inappropriate or dangerous, and block those apps. Learn how to do the privacy settings or the family plan, things of that sort. Now, I'm not saying to cut them off completely, because there are ways that students are still going to be able to work around certain things. But I think the most important tool is having those honest, truthful conversations, and just being able to speak to your child, not punish them or in a way where I'm going to take your phone away or do this, but talking to them about the consequences, and just continually just reminding them, nudging them with that. Because many times when you try and just really just force things on them or they're not going to react very well, and they're just going to want to try it more, and maybe even just go even deeper into whatever it is that they're doing. So it's just, again, know what's out there, know what's best, make those suggestions. And at the end of the day too, is we need to make sure that we trust that our child is going to make the best decision. And by giving them resources as well, and speaking to them about those dangers, that can also help them take that split 2 seconds to maybe say, hey, maybe I'm not going to put this into Gemini or Claude or GPT or Instagram or TikTok or anything out there. And then they kind of take a break and say, okay. And that's a small win. The fact that they're thinking about the consequences and what may come in the future, that's huge. So I can't tell you specific, like I recommend this or that. It's really informing yourself to inform your child. And then again, based on what you share with them, that you make the best decisions, or that the child makes the best decisions there too as well.
Exactly. And I think parents should know that they play a big role in their kids' education. Many parents actually forget about the role, and they think that their kids can only get educated, their education from school. But they actually have half of their time well, a little bit less than half of the time well, the part of their life, a very important part is at home. So they should be actively involved in educating them, right? Also goes
Absolutely.
back, what? Yeah, and then like cutting out candies, for example, is not healthy. And this I learned it the hard way, because I know that sugar is bad, so you cut it out here, you hide it. Your kids actually think much more about the candies. It's a bit like, yeah, right? Like if you tell them
Yeah.
no, you're not allowed to use any of it, they will find a way. They will get obsessed about it, and they will end up addicted to it, and then maybe they will hide it from you. They will just do it behind your back. So it's very important to maybe do it together, provide them some, but not cut it out completely, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And
Yeah.
again, like you said, it's just having those conversations. And one thing that, again, I just want to reiterate, like you mentioned, schools, like my encouragement for your audience, I know, because your audience, I know, is going to be in Europe, and I know it'll probably be heard around the world. But my my best advice is really to encourage schools, please, please include parents within your learning community. Oftentimes we use the word learning community, but we always exclude the parents. Include them in the conversations. It's okay that sometimes parents may come and they're going to ask a lot of questions. They reserve the right to ask questions. They're trusting you as an educator, as a school, with their child. So if there's a concern, maybe they need to talk about it. Please hear them out, because it's something that can help you as a district, as a school, as a superintendent, get that feedback and say, okay, what can we do different to help? I mean, if we're getting this feedback from parents, are we listening to it and just putting it aside and just kind of giving them a space to just talk? Or are we going to take actionable steps to help remedy those situations? And so with that being said, it's the conversation around AI. Please include parents in there, get some feedback, start a little small group of your stakeholders, maybe have some parent representatives in their student representation, and then teacher, and then of course your district leaders, and have those conversations to see what would work best. and talk through those concerns, talk through the positives, and then see what you can come up with. But please don't let parents out of the picture. Include them in everything. And I can guarantee you that it's something that is going to really help out significantly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the contact should come from a place of respect as well. Because
Mhm.
sometimes teachers, well, I would say many teachers underestimate the feedback that they can get from the parents. Like you should see them as a partner, right, in the education of your kid instead of thinking of yourself as the expert and everybody else don't understand what you're doing. And I think if once the parents, feel like they are being treated equally as an equal partner, maybe they will open up more. Maybe they will get involved more in the educational process of their kids, right? They won't feel like left out. I would like to go back to AI, if you don't mind.
Yes.
I have a couple of questions about, you talked before about the underprivileged communities in Texas. Do you think AI and tech in general, like, could be an equalizer in the near future, especially for maybe kids who grow up in single parents with single parents or in poor or difficult conditions? Do you think having access to cheap technology could help them maybe compete with others who grew up in rich, well-off families?
Yeah,
Is it gonna
absolutely.
really be a game changer or
Yeah,
not?
that's a great question. Many years ago, 2018, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but I went to a conference and he said that education is a disruptor of poverty. And technology definitely plays a big role in that. Now, your question is really near and dear to me in the sense that because of the area that I live in, we don't have as many resources as schools that are located 4 hours north of us. I mean, 4 hours, it may not seem like a lot, it's a 4 hour drive, but the difference in the demographic and obviously the economy is huge, where the schools are. And even within there, you do have certain sections of privileged schools and so on that don't have those needs. So that exists everywhere. My biggest thing is, we always talk in education, the biggest buzzwords, like I mentioned earlier, is like equity, access, and, trying to personalize learning and so on. And you're selling me on those buzzwords, but why aren't we taking actionable steps to really remedy that? Because the solution you're offering, there's no equity in that because I can't afford it. I can't
Mhm.
access it because I can't afford it. So, what can we do to remedy that? And I think that that's something that needs to really be looked at too, as well. And I'm not saying that you need to go into a system where everybody gets equal everything, but there needs to be at least the most minimum form of technology as far as one student device, whether it's just in school or they get to take home, but it's really the wi-fi and internet access. I mean, without that access, there's only so much that you can do. So many times, you'll see students in a very well-off community that can say, oh yeah, oh, no worries, I have homework, I'll just go home and do it because I have Wi-Fi and I have my own device, or I'm using the school's device. But yet on the north side of my district, you'll have kids that say, well, miss, I can't do the homework because I don't have internet. And I'm like, wow, and so that even within your school district, you still have those inequities and, to access and so on. So I think the solution is really something that has to be just greater than what we can do within our district. And it's something that has to be looked at significantly, not only within our state level, but a national level. And I think that only then, in seeing these and sharing these, and I know that they have to know that this is happening, but why isn't there anything being done? But I do think that, for example, a technology like ChatGPT in in a certain setting can be very helpful. And one thing that you mentioned, like let's say many schools in let's say the poorest places in Africa where maybe they don't have enough teachers. And this is what Stefan Bouchard, who was a guest, said, that he had a friend who they don't have enough teachers and the class load is huge. So being able to leverage something like, a chat GPT or AI can be something beneficial, because this way students can have access to just resources, or the teacher can readily create things easy for a room that may encompass anybody from first through fifth grade, or so on and so forth. So if you notice, like, depending on the setting that you're in, the there's certain things that will help out and you see that promise. But many times, in the settings that we may find ourselves in, we don't see that promise yet for some reason, and even though we may have the computers and we may have that internet access at school, there's still a lot of issues there, where even the smallest platform, like we just said, maybe something like ChatGPT over there, can go a long way. Here, there's still, a lot of room to grow and go, because of our infrastructure and that inequity and the pricing. And sometimes schools are going to get priced out at a certain point, and they're going to miss out on those apps that can help developmental skills and help teachers and teacher pay and so on. So there's a lot of work to be done. And to say that it can change education, it can, but when and how? And then my question is like, who gets to see that? Because of the funding process of it. Will my district ever get to see some kind of innovation that is huge? Or are we always going to be just looking up at the districts 4 hours south of us because they have more funds, and say, man, I wish that we can do that, but we can't. And so it's kind of scary. There's promise, but then even within that promise, I still think about, the access to it. So I know that was a long answer, but it was
That's a
just
very
what came
interesting
onto
point.
my mind right now.
No, but that's actually a very interesting point. I've never thought about it. I was talking about technology, but I forgot that simple, fact that some kids don't even have access to a device or to internet. What would be the solution if you were the governor of your state? What would you like? What do you guys need right now to make sure that all kids have equal access to the basic, I
Mm.
would call it human right needs,
Yeah, human needs, just a basic human. Like for myself, if I was
Issue.
governor, the very first thing that I would do is I would just say, okay, guys, we all have Wi-Fi. Like I don't care how we do it, we'll figure it out. I just want to make sure that we have Wi-Fi access. Now, there are a couple of cities here nearby that they offer, Wi-Fi hotspots within certain streets or within certain neighborhoods and so on. So they're, being very active in those approaches, but it's only certain districts or certain streets now. What I would love to see is just that everyone would be able to have access for little to no cost, or even for them, no cost to them, and figure out some way to be able to pay that off, because obviously there's got to be some funding somewhere. But just get creative. For me, if I can give every child access to internet at home, that I know that they can go home, and let's say that they did all their homework in school, but that they can go home and even do independent practice. Everybody assumes like, oh, the kid is just going to go home and they're going to play video games. Yeah, they're young, they're kids. What do you expect? They're going to play games, they're going to have fun. But at the same time, there's going to be some students that do have that access at home, that can be like, wow, I have access to all of this, and I'm going to learn how to program. I'm going to watch this YouTube video on how to do math maybe a different way, and so on. So that is for me my hope, that one day, if I were to become governor, we would just see internet access, free Wi-Fi spread out around just our whole nation. Why should we cut access from people? And I know it's a business, and I know there's that business aspect, but just the basic human need of access to
Water.
Wi-Fi. Yeah, access to Wi-Fi, communication, for learning, that's what we want. We know that we have libraries that do have internet access in those spaces, but many people they may not want to go out there. Maybe they also, we need to take into consideration, many people that do need that access, sometimes they don't even have transportation to get to those places or money for the to get to those places. So let me share something with you as far as what access can do. So there's a school district that is our neighbor here to the west. There in that population, there is a large level of very low income families. Now, one thing that happens is that those families do not have vehicles, or they can't get to a school to go register their son or daughter at school for that following year, and so on. So what this district did is they turned a bus into kind of like a tech bus. And so
Mhm.
what they did is they'll go and park at a neighbor, just a neighborhood. And what they're doing is they'll allow parents to just walk up to the bus, and they can go help help them register their child and provide that access for them that they need, because they can't do it from home because they're not tech savvy, they don't have internet, and sometimes they don't even have vehicles to make it to the school to register their child. So the fact that they're taking those approaches to go and park every couple of blocks, depending on the day, to give those people access really helps out a lot. Now imagine if just that neighborhood, if they could just flip a switch to turn Wi-Fi on and to help them, register their child without having to worry about driving, or, I've got to go to the tech bus. Now my child has access here. My child can study at home. To me, that would be something beautiful. But it just seems that even with AI, I'll be honest with you, I was reading here in the guidance for UNESCO stating that it would even probably cause even more of a divide, as far as we already know the digital divide, but now there would be an even larger divide as well, because of the technology, because of the people who have access and people that don't. So that's a scary part there too, that this, instead of getting better as far as working on the digital divide, can still get a little bit worse, or a lot more worse than it is now. So very interesting stuff.
These are very interesting insights that you're sharing with us, Fons. I mean, like many people wouldn't even imagine the state, like, the image we have of the United States, it's totally different. Like knowing that now, learning that some people there don't, maybe might not have access to a certain place or to internet, which is, like and then at the same time you have Elon, talking about giving universal access to internet, and Meta as well as Zuckerberg was talking about it. I was like, why go far? Why don't you just provide maybe satellite internet to everybody living in the States, since you come from the States? Don't know. Maybe you should think about it. When we talk about the language, I know you're probably getting tired.
No, no,
So
no. I'm good. I'm
oh,
good.
you're
I'm
okay?
good.
You're good? Ah,
Yeah, I'm
perfect. Okay,
good.
so I because like this is very exciting. Being a bilingual person yourself, because we talk about, I've seen quite a few AI tools talking about, translating what you're saying from one language to the other. Now, my question would be, why learn any like a foreign language or a second or a third language? I speak 5 languages, by the way, and I feel like it's amazing because it's like exercise for the brain.
Yeah.
But if a kid, if one of your students comes up to you and say, Fons, why do I need to learn a foreign language if in a few years from now I can just push a button and translate what I'm saying instantaneously, like simultaneously? Like, why would I? Like, what would be your answer to this question?
Yeah. That's a great question, because you don't even need to wait 5 years from now, because you've got this in your hand. And I know you've got the humane pin also as well, and all that stuff that they're sharing. But I mean, with this phone, you can have that conversation back and forth. Now, one thing that I love that you said, that really I said this is the reason why. I mean, number one, it keeps your brain sharp. Knowing another language, it's really a superpower, being able to learn a lot of language. Number two, for me, is what if, and I said, what if one day all of this just shuts down completely? How are
Like the
you going to
Netflix movie.
communicate? how are you going to communicate? You
Mm.
know, I know that English is very popular. I know Spanish is, you know, around the world too. Spanish is very popular. So I think I would be okay, you know, both English and Spanish. But for you, like for example, you have 5 languages. Oh my gosh, you know, you would be able to help, you know, translate for a whole nation to, you know, us, you know, that may not know a language, you know, like French or things of that sort. But, you know, I know that technology can help streamline a lot of things. And one of the things too is the communication aspect, that we now become very dependent on technology to help us with that language. And I understand this because coming from a teacher side, there are many teachers here where I live, predominantly like 95, well, probably like 97, 98% of the population is Spanish speaking. We have teachers that are not Spanish speaking teachers that find it very difficult to communicate with parents. So they'll rely on some of the technology. So I'm glad that there are some of those technology tools that are available to help them be able to translate or even to be able to communicate with students as well, because we do get a lot of emergent bilinguals that, you know, throughout the year they'll start trickling in, you know, various grade levels. And then we get students from Mexico, we get students from Korea, from Japan. We've had students from Israel one year. And to me, when there is a barrier to learning, it is so frustrating because I saw it in myself, because I don't know their language and I want them to learn. But then I saw the frustration in their eyes when they just stare at you hopeless and you're teaching and they don't understand what you're saying. And so, yes, I'm thankful that we have that technology for that, because that one year that I had a student come in from Israel was very tough, and I even learned some Hebrew so I can communicate with them aside from the translation here. But just to do that, and it made a huge impact on him that I took the time to learn the minimum phrases, but just to be able to communicate with them, to show him that I too was in the struggle with him, made a huge, huge difference to take that time. Right now, I think with education, we just want to get everything done quick. Like you mentioned, fast food. It's like, hey, just give me a translator. I just want to get the information out with no regard of like, hey, you know, let me learn a little bit more of this culture. Let me learn how I can communicate. Let me learn how to do a little bit of this. And because this is all we need. I don't need to learn anything. I just need to communicate with you, do these 10 problems, and that's it. You're done. That's what you're doing, and so on. So the important, I think, is it's important that you learn various languages because, again, the critical thinking that takes place, the brain power that you have, the marketability that you have also as well, in being able to not only be available in your job market within, like, let's say if you're in France, but let's say that now you've got, you know, people coming in from Spain, or you've got investors, or you've got
Playground now.
people,
The world is your
yeah,
playground.
and you've got people coming
Marketplace.
in now. You're able to communicate with them. Now you're making yourself more valuable to whomever it is that you're going to be working with, and now you're that person, that point of contact. So it's going to open up doors and opportunities. And again, I'm not saying that this is terrible to use, but for those instances, if you're traveling or you just need a quick translator, it's great. But do take time to learn a new language. And now with the tech, it's so easy now to learn new languages. If you're like, you know, on Duolingo, or you're on Babbel, or you're on, you know, whatever app that is out there, just learning some of the basic phrases and immersing yourself a little bit into that culture. It's surprising how people look at you differently than that. You're like, oh wow, they took the time to learn a little bit about him. You know, it does open up doors. But again, I think to me, it's just that personal value that it gives you, not only personally but professionally, is huge. And like I mentioned, one of these days, what if all of this shuts down? I think
And it could happen, actually.
you're
I
gonna
mean,
be good.
far-fetched, right?
Yeah.
Uh, but I think actually a lot of people right now are too dependent, and eventually a lot of people are going to get too dependent on technology, and then they're going to go, you know, hit the gym. It's a bit like, you know, we invented the car, people driving tons, and now like it's been like this maybe probably for 20 years. People are talking about hitting the gym, eating healthy, walking more. So technology, we should see technology as a tool, as a crutch, right? But we should keep using our brain. NVIDIA's CEO, I don't know if you heard his quote, and it totally, like he said, coding in 5 years, no one would need to go, like, don't even teach your kids coding. The first thing that actually struck me was, it's like saying, don't teach them to languages. In 5 years, we'll have apps. So that's why I was asking
Mhm.
you, did you hear this quote?
Yes, I
What was
saw
your
the
thought? What's your take on
my
this?
I was like, this is terrible. This is very terrible. Number one, to me, the people that have spent time coding and learning, because coding itself is a language. To me,
Mm,
it's like they're learning a language that I have no clue what is going on, and they're coding and they're speaking a language that gives instructions to a lot of the technology that we're currently using right now. So now this gentleman is saying, we won't need any code because yes, you can do some code in Chat GPT and so on. But for me, who am I? I'm a novice coder, or have never even, maybe just ever used it. And now I'm relying on the technology to give me this code. Well, how do I know that this code is not accurate? How do I know that this code is not going to be something that's going to be useful to me? I don't know. And I'm going to depend on somebody that knows that to decipher this language for me. Now, I know that processing power and all of that knowledge is going to get better and better. And maybe essentially there may be a time where there may not be a need. However, the way I always see it is this: it's like with any new technology, there's always got to be somebody out there that's going to be able to fix it.
mm,
And for us, when we fix our tech, we've got a user manual or we'll look up YouTube. But for that heavy tech that is out there on the back end running everything, like maybe there isn't a user manual and the person that knows how to code is that user manual. So there has to be somebody there also to keep kind of like a checks and balances. We
mm,
can't just outsource this to the technology to say, hey, you do it for me. But how do I know that there's a check and balance there, that it's working the way it should? Or
mm.
maybe there's something unethical going on in the background,
Robots are taking over.
and little things like that that are just crawling the web, doing little things. We just want to make sure that everybody's safe. And I know people may be listening like, man, this guy's really out of it. But I just like to think many times kind of worst case scenario, because I don't want to get to that point. And if we have these conversations, people maybe will just start kind of like thinking, saying, hey, you know what? That just kind of doesn't quite sit well with me. Why would somebody say, you won't need to learn how to code? Because then later on, it's like, you don't need math anymore. You don't need history. And then all of a sudden, our history is wiped out. And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, well, ChatGPT said that the United States, the Independence Day was on May 13th, which is Fonz's birthday. And that's when we celebrate Independence Day. And you're thinking, what? Like, what's going on? And which kind of brings me to a point, Moses, that, and again, reading this article, and I'll share that link with you for the UNESCO report, was saying that eventually the fear is that the more outputs we get from generative AI that we create, let's say that you create this wonderful blog, and then I was like, man, I love that blog. I'm gonna go ahead and download it or copy it into ChatGPT or whatever, just so you can give me those bullet points that are important, and it gives me the important bullet points. And now I tell ChatGPT, okay, rewrite a variation of Moses's blog, but put it in my voice. And now it'll put it in my voice. And then what I'm going to do is, let's say I post it, and then somebody else grabs that and then does the same thing. And so all of that is going into the
Yeah.
GPT language learning model, where now it's really just going to be spitting out that same information over and over. And it's not going to be, you know, what's the word? It's only that's going to be its knowledge base.
Yeah.
In other words, we're not going to be, we're giving it back those outputs that we find are truths. And now it's part of that knowledge base. And now we're blurring what is
Yeah.
actually true. and what might be very historical, because we're putting back these inputs that are not reliable back into it, and it's learning from it. That's the scary part. And that was in this report. And I was like,
Like
oh my
fake news.
goodness.
Sounds like social media, actually. It reminds me of like Facebook and fake news. Like suddenly when somebody starts sharing an article, even if it's fake news, and then I
Yeah.
share my mother and my mother, like, and then
Yeah.
everybody, when we end up believing like BS, right?
Yes.
Oh my God, that's extremely hard. How do you picture the future? Like, in 10 years from now, even though no, 10 years is probably too far, but 5 years from now, do you feel like education is going to be any change in the States?
uh so 5 years,
You know,
well, look, the way the I remember back when, okay, the internet, okay, so it changed education in that it made, information more easily accessible to us right away off the bat. Cell phones gives us information right off the bat. AI, it's going to help automate a lot of things in our life and make things a lot easier and simpler. Did it really change education or internet? It did. There are some changes, but I think that what really needs to change is just adapting education and pedagogy all together. I think the technology is there to innovate. And like we were talking about, what innovative things are really happening with AI. Everybody uses innovate and transform and this and that. But really, I've just seen that I can create worksheets faster. So really it's a substitution for me. And I go back to the SAMR model, which is substitution, augmentation, modification, and redefinition. So for me, when I was in the classroom, I would give paper exit tickets. Then we started getting Chromebooks, and now my students had Chromebooks, and now I was doing digital exit tickets, which were Google Forms. So now, before I had 90 pieces of paper on my desk that I had to look through and grade,
yeah,
and then in physical copy, when I got my Chromebooks, I still had 90, you know digital worksheets or feedback papers that I still had. So it was really, all I'm doing is just substituting. So it wasn't until we started doing the project based learning where we were really augmenting, and then we were using Google Meet to bring in guests, where we were, really going into the augmenting side, and then trying to redefine the learning and doing things that were not possible before. And I
yeah,
think many times right now we're just seeing technology as just a substitute for what we used to do, and now just to do it faster and just automate what we used to do and doing it faster, and there isn't any modification or redefinition. So I think that that's not on entirely on technology their fault. It's really on working on pedagogy altogether, and getting changing those antiquated practices, I guess, in a way to where it's fitting the technology that we have, and really pushing things forward in doing things differently. So will technology change in the next five, or education change in the next 5 years? I hope it does. I really hope it does, because that's why we have these conversations. And what you're doing here today with me, and what I do through the podcast, and what you're doing through your podcast, these are the conversations that need to get out there to see what we can do to change. So, is there going to be change? Yes, there's a lot of change agents out there. Is it going to be something that's going to be very noticeable? Probably not, because there's only a certain amount of change agents within a certain space, within a state, within a school, within a district, and so on, that oftentimes it's going to get overlooked. But if we continually take this message forward and just help our teachers improve pedagogical practices and really give them the professional development they need, like you mentioned, the technology is the tool, but they are that knowledge base. They are that facilitator that can take that knowledge and enhance it, and enhance that learning experience with the technology to deliver it in a way that the student is engaged, and in a way that makes it memorable to the student as well. So, yes, there will be change. How much of it? I'm not sure. Uh, do I encourage it? Yes. So all my change agents out there that are listening, Do it, have some conversations, push the box, push the envelope. Don't be scared to take risks. And let's do what we can to change the education landscape. What I always say in my podcast. The conversations here are to help change the education landscape for the better. So yes, there will be some change for sure.
But it's especially assessment, right?
Oh yeah.
Do you think AI should, like, the way we assess, like, now, instead of giving an art, not now with AI, our students actually could just write a, like, if you give them an assignment to write, you could use AI. How can we make sure they can work while having access to AI? They can do
Yeah.
their work while having access to AI.
Yeah.
I
I
would
love it.
love your take on this.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely. Okay.
teachers that are afraid, they feel like, it's impossible, and now it's made people's lives much harder, especially
Yeah.
teachers.
Yeah, no. So I'm going to go back to me teaching in the classroom. And mind you, this was probably 10 years ago, 11 years ago, because I'm in this new role for 8 years now. But even then, when I had Chromebooks, you know, I'm going to be honest with you, I never gave a test, never gave a test to my students on Fridays, never gave a test on units, never gave a test. Now, my principals didn't know that at the time at all whatsoever. And so now I'm kind of outing myself on that aspect. However, what I did do with that is going back to what we said, kind of that project based learning approach, where I allowed students to show me the content mastery in a modality that they felt comfortable with. There was a single rubric that I did as far as a 1 point rubric, and then I would give feedback what you can improve or what was great. Very simple rubric. My learning artifact from them was just their final product, where they would either present, so they would do either a Google slide presentation, stand up in front of the class, present. They would share a video with me, screencastify video, or whatever modality they wanted. That was a 3-minute video about what we were doing, and of course they had little requirements there. Some of them did graphics, and then they would present their graphics and the representation. Some of them actually used Scratch coding, and they coded a presentation. So going back to not just giving just worksheets on facts, but they created the lunar cycle using Scratch coding. And what they did was really cool, because with Scratch coding, they put the Chromebook in front of them, and so it was a transparent background. So when they would point to something here on the screen, you would see like the moon phase, and then they would explain the moon phase. Then they would point here, and then you'd see the little moon pop up. So they were learning coding in 5th grade with the little that I shared with them. So all of that to say this, I think the biggest barrier is just that fear of failing. And
Mhm.
that's okay, and I understand veteran teachers that have been doing this for a long time. Trust me, there's still veteran teachers out there that are still using pencil, pen, paper, and so on, and are still engaging. So there, I can't say anything bad about that, because there are still wonderful teachers that are out there that are engaging. However, there are some teachers that maybe want to change their practice, because maybe some of the things that they're doing, they're just looking for something different to spice things up a little bit. The technology is there. It's a matter of just getting creative with it, and taking a risk. And one of the biggest things is also knowing who your students are, knowing how they learn, knowing what they like, and using that as leverage for you to be able to present the knowledge in that way, and allowing them to share their knowledge and what they've learned from you in that particular way. So, like you mentioned, what if there's a kid that likes video games? Maybe he created a video game about history. I had one student that created a video game about predators and prey, and he created a little video game that I can play on my phone. And he shared the learning with me, because it would show the predator, and then it would stop at a plant, and it would tell me about the plant. Then the predator moves, and then he like eats I think he put a deer there, and he eats a deer, and then it tells me what it's doing and so on. To me, I was like, you've mastered this content. You know exactly what it does, because you're buying into it, you're learning it, you've internalized it, and you created an artifact that will go into your portfolio. So for me, that was the artifact that I needed. And I was like, hey, you got 100. There wasn't
Yeah.
a kid that failed my class. And at the end of the year, my kids I had the highest attendance rate because it cured absenteeism, because students did not want to miss my class because they're like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do today? What are we going to learn? So absenteeism was at an all-time low. And then my students ended up with the highest grades within my district for their science state assessment. And then I had students now that are currently at Georgia Tech working cybersecurity or doing cybersecurity degrees and so on, because they said, because of what you shared with me when I was in sixth grade, in fifth grade, I decided to follow a path in cybersecurity, in computer science, and so on. So, really, my biggest advice to teachers is take some time to know who your students are, leverage their passion and their strengths, and present the material in a way that um, is conducive to them, but allow them and give them time for discourse, for talking, for discussion, and to create a wonderful product for you. Now, with that being said, there is still, obviously some components that they can use AI for and so on, which is okay. For me, I would say if you are using AI, you need to cite for me what it is that you used it for, how you used it. But with that rubric, they're still going to have to, number one, create a video, or a graphic, or so on and so forth. But once they're in it, a lot of times they don't even rely on the tech. It's just them doing
Mm.
it because of their passion. But the tech is there and they'll use it. It's okay. Just cite it for me. But I want to see your thought process in the creative. So again, going back, we focus on the product, but never on the process. So for me, I
The
like to
journey.
focus on the process
Yeah.
and not so much on the product.
No, you're totally right. And I think the best way to learn and the best approach is the project-based learning. It's the closest to real life situations,
Mhm.
like real life as an entrepreneur, for example. You think you're building something. So as an entrepreneur, you have to learn maybe about you have to learn to speak, to sell your ideas. You have to learn about the product that you're building. You have to learn about how social skills. So it's many skills, under one umbrella. So maybe this is the best way to do, but it requires a lot of time as well, a lot of time from the teachers themselves. So as you mentioned before, going back, many teachers are not many, but some teachers will just take the easy route and take, like the easy interface worksheets, give them out, and that's it,
Yeah. Well,
which
let
is
me let me share something with you. Like the project-based learning for me, it actually helped me do more because I was able to bundle a lot of standards together. So I actually, even though it seems like it's more work, the students are actually doing all the work. You're really just facilitating, but the expectation is there on what they're covering. So, yes, you can say, okay, I'm going to do one worksheet for this standard, one worksheet for this standard, one worksheet for this standard, one worksheet for this standard. So, let's say that you cover 5 standards that week. That's what, 90 times 5, that's 450 worksheets that I have to grade in that week. I mean, that's a lot of work where I can just say, okay, guys, let's go ahead and discuss what we're going to cover. Do the introduction. This is what we're going to cover. We're going to cover this, and that. So you take one day of instruction, give them 3 days, of working on their projects, walking them through. You're walking around facilitating. I'm not doing any work. I haven't had to lift a pencil at all for grading or anything at all. It's just walking, checking in on my students, seeing how they're doing. They're checking in with me. I'm checking in with them. And then at the end on Friday, they present. I haven't lifted a pencil yet or a pen to grade anything because the end is going to be their final product. But those 3 days, I've captured in my mind their thought process. I've helped guide them. I've helped them steer back into focus in what they're doing. to help them out and so on. And now they have a finished product that is wonderful. But I already knew 3 day or the day prior their presentation that they've mastered that content. So I was able to bundle more within
Mm.
those projects than to say, here's one worksheet for a standard. That's 90 worksheets I got to grade now. Here's another standard. There's another 90 worksheets. And here's a 90, another 90 worksheet. So I did less work, didn't even lift a pen to grade other than to just enter the grade into the grade book. But I have a beautiful learning artifact that serves as evidence of
Mm.
that learning, but also serves as evidence of growth because in my area, we would have a lot of emergent bilingual students. So they there was no exception for them as far as doing this. Like they still had to do the project. But however, I knew that the language support needed to be there and so on. But one thing that I will tell you is that from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, that language acquisition for those students, and we're talking about proper academic vocabulary, was through the roof. That students were able to exit the bilingual program within 1 year because I had evidence of where they started through those projects and where they finished.
Sure.
And that is the amazing part of it, that now you have evidence, substantial, tangible, I guess, digital, artifact that your administration can see and look at and see the growth. So again, it does seem like a lot of work, and I know I played it off like, oh, it was easy, but it fit my style because coming in from business and sales, selling and marketing, that was my thing, and it was customer service. So really it was just walking around taking care of my little customers, making sure that they're on track, making sure I help them out so that way they can go ahead and give and present the best product at the end.
Like,
So, like I said, it's just risk taking. uh, Try it out. Start slow. You don't have to jump in right away. Just do it with one little project. Give it a shot. Lose that fear and then just see what you learn from it and then just continue to, I guess, improve upon those things and what you learn. And trust me, your students will give you feedback and just build that culture of feedback and it's going to be great.
it sounds like it's less work for the teachers and more learning materials for the kids. Because if they're building something, they have to
Mhm.
learn about different, as you said, standards, like the
Mhm.
different subjects under one project. So it's like a win-win, right?
Yeah, it's a win-win. And believe it or not, when I did my master's program did not require a comprehensive exam. My master's program required a portfolio. And so really in all my coursework, there was a major project and then maybe like two mini projects. And then all I had to do was create a website that
Yeah.
shares that. So that was my portfolio. And that's all I had to submit at the end of my master's because their program said, we want you to use what we're teaching you in a real world situation. And we want you to apply it to solve a problem, whether it's for work or something personal. And we want to just see you using and implementing that technology and how you solved it. And they gave you kind of like free reign. Like you can use any technology you want as long as it's free, because we don't want you to pay for anything, but you're just going to submit this to us. And it blew my mind that my university just said, this is all we want. Like, we know this is going to show us that you have mastered our standards that we have, that we follow, but you have a nice portfolio at the end that you can share with potential employers and things of that sort. In my doctoral program, I had a teacher that would give us a choice board. Now, Moses, that was the most shocking thing of me seeing when I saw that the teacher gave us a choice board and you had professional adults that have been in education as long as I have, or maybe a little bit less, not understanding. Like, what do you mean? Like, I don't understand. She's like, yeah, you can do this, or this, and that'll be your final project. And the stares on their faces were like, I don't get it. They were confused. Why are they confused? Because our nation, And our state is notorious for standardized tests where the answers are either A, B, C, or D. So now as an adult, it's like, no, 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 no. Don't give me a choice. Just tell me what I need to do to get the 100, and that's all I'm going to do. So she said, no, this is your choice board. So you could choose either A, B, C, or D. And then, of course, I raised my hand and I said, Dr. Jewett, can I do a podcast? And she's like, well, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, you can go ahead and do a podcast. So my final project was a podcast, and that was
Yeah.
it. And I loved it. And the reason that I found that so novel was because this is what I was doing in my classroom 10 years ago, or 11 years prior, and now I'm getting to see it in higher ed, where it always seems like it's so rigid, and it's always got to be the same lessons all the time. And she changed it up on us, and it was so refreshing to see that. So that's why I said, like, when you asked that question, do you see education changing? My hope is that it does, because I'm seeing that universities also as well are changing some of their practices and methodologies as far as projects and the learning process there as well. So yeah, like I said, it really came in handy for sure.
And it makes more sense even because learning actually throughout history has always been going out and living real life situations. People, when you went out to hunt, you took your kids with you and they hunted with you, you know. Even animals, when you look at the animal kingdom, you go out to learn, and on the job, it's on the job learning. So maybe our learning systems actually should adapt, should do the same instead of just sitting, in a classroom memorizing a bunch of theoretical stuff. You
Yeah.
just need to do it, to learn by doing.
Yeah. And I had a great conversation with a friend of mine. His name's Micah Shippey. And we were talking about how that art of teaching and the storytelling aspect of it, we're not seeing it anymore. It's just worksheet, worksheet, worksheet. And we're talking about, like, even back when, in the caveman, there's caves where there's people that are drawing, and they're telling stories through those drawings. When somebody sat to learn from a philosopher or a stoic, you sat there and they spoke to you, they shared stories, there was discourse, there was the sharing of ideas back and forth. And now really what you see, like they say it here very often, it's a sage on the stage. And that means, the teacher's the expert and only they talk and you just listen. And so our education system has made our students more consumers than creators, because they're just consuming the knowledge, but there's no discourse to share ideas, to create, and to amplify certain things, and share their thought process. And like you mentioned, these are practices that were had many years ago, and we've built
Thousands.
knowledge on that. But now it's like, the only way that I know that you learned this is you get 100 on that worksheet, and now I know that you understood. Well, I mean, to me, that just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Speaking of podcasting and the creative part of phones, how did you come up with your like the idea of like podcasting in the first place a few
Yeah,
years?
yeah, this was 4 years
Mention it
ago.
briefly. I'd like actually to know more, like go into more details and get some of your advice on like how to be an amazing podcaster.
Absolutely. Okay. So again, it started off with Global GEG, which was Google Educator Group, the Global Educator Group. And so again, during COVID, April 10th of 2020 is when I started my podcast. But what really led that inspiration was, like I mentioned, during COVID, there was a huge need for resources, especially for Latin America, being able to share knowledge and being able to speak Spanish. I was doing a lot of presentations on a lot of platforms out there, such as Cami, Edpuzzle, and so on. And so then I said, okay, I'm going to start a podcast to kind of do the same thing, but it really turned more into, like I mentioned, hearing real stories, talking a little bit about technology, but also what are the barriers, what are the obstacles, what are you seeing, how are the kids acting, mental health, things of that sort, because teachers were going through a tough time. And obviously, as things bettered or got a lot better, then it was just more tech focused and just inviting people to come on. And then it got to a point where now people are like messaging me like, can I be on your podcast, can I be on your podcast, which has been great. But to be honest with you, it's been 3 years in the making, and just now people are reaching out to me to be on my podcast, which is really cool, and which I like because it helps find guests a lot faster also as well. But I still love, my passion was really to amplify educator voices. Then it turned into educator and creator voices. Now it's entrepreneurs, founders, to really get a holistic view of education. I don't want to just hear from teachers. I want to hear from the founders, and I want to hear like, what are you doing to listen to teachers? What are you creating? Also, and then obviously the education professionals that are out there doing professional development, and asking like, what are some of the obstacles that you're seeing? What can we do better? And just having honest, authentic conversations, because the goal is to always, like I mentioned, improve our education landscape. And as of lately, obviously I've been focusing on a lot of AI, because that's really the topic right now, and there's a lot of doubts, there's a lot of things happening, we're still navigating this space and so on. But really, the podcast came out of that, just my passion for listening to stories. This is the way that I learn, you
Knowing
know,
how to listen.
yeah, just listening. I just want to sit down, and I call this my 1 hour of professional PD that everybody benefits from, because now I've got a subject matter expert that I can ask my questions to, that I feel that are going to benefit, all of the educators out there. And I just sit here and listen, and I enjoy it. And the fact that I get a subject matter expert that I can ask questions like, what are your perspectives on this? Or what do you think about this? Or, I agree with this. Or maybe, you know what, maybe I don't agree with this too much. But being authentic and having that discourse has been so important. And I know that there are many amazing EdTech podcasts out there in this space.
I gotta
And
say, yours is one of the best. That was
thank you. There are so many that are out there that do things so well, and I love listening to other podcasts too. And I love the fact that I never feel that we're competing with one another, because we do things differently. We do things slightly different, even though we may be the same guests, our questions are different and so on. So the fact that maybe I was like, oh man, I missed that question, and that was such a good question, I get to listen to the guest again, and just kind of take all of that in. And so really it's just listening to people. And I don't know if that comes from, I've kind of talked about it and talked to myself through it. uh, Growing up, like I mentioned, as an only child, I never had brothers and sisters. I never had any relatives nearby, really a lot of cousins or anything that were my age. So really a lot of the people that I knew were just the kids at school. And when I started, being able to grow up and visit their houses, they had brothers and sisters, and they had large families and so on. So I would just sit there at like the table or the couch or wherever we would be, because I'm just visiting, my friend, and I would just listen to all their stories. And I just found it so fascinating just to listen and hear things from different perspectives, and kind of try like experiencing that as if it was my family again. So I think that's what makes me a really good listener, because I just never had that experience of having siblings. And so to be able to hear people talk about their brother and sister, or talk about siblings and family, I just was just engaged in their stories. And so that's why I think that really helps me be a really good listener on the podcast. And then really just ask questions, and thoughtful questions, to help, engage not only my audience, but engage my guests as well, and making them feel comfortable. And so it's also an art in being able to read my guest, and based on their answer, like, can I pull a little bit more? Or is this the time to kind of transition? Because I never want my guests to ever feel like, they're put on the spot or anything. This is just a casual, smooth conversation. And I want to make sure that my guest is also shown in the best light possible, because I want to amplify their voice. I want other people to connect with them and find value in the work that they're doing. So it's been a wonderful, amazing experience for me, that I've met so many great people and it's opened up so many opportunities, but also being able to connect people where maybe a guest that I had, all of a sudden now they're like on 5 podcasts in a row, but they were like, well, it was because you were the first one I was on, and you gave, that helped out. And I love that, that continual growth, because, somebody took a chance on me one time. I want to give that chance to somebody also as well, for them to continue to grow.
Yeah, actually now I understand why your podcast is such a good one, because you have genuine interest in humans and you're a good listener. Because that actually was a question I was going to ask you, like what does it take to make to be a good host? So you have to be able to listen, you have to be able to read off people and be really genuinely interested in knowing about them,
Mm.
right? What's your process? How do you prepare for an episode? Let's say have a guest coming, like okay, before they started reaching out to you, when you reached out to get, what was exactly the process? If you can walk us through, because I'd
Yeah,
love to.
absolutely. Yeah. So for anybody there that's interested in like podcasting and everything, you're like, well, how do I start? Well, I mean, number one, really find your niche. What is it that you're passionate about? What is it that you just sit down and listen to somebody for hours on end talking about? And for me, obviously, it's just anything technology related. So I figured, okay, let's do that technology podcast. And so that worked out well. But one of the things that I want to advise or to give as far as advice is, never be scared to reach out to anybody on social media. Sometimes there are people on social media that have these wonderful and great personas that are so well known, that are, like just up there at the top of their game. And you
Tons
may
of
be
followers.
and you may think like, I no, they'll never be on my show. No. I was like, you know what? Just reach out to them, and trust me, sometimes you're gonna be surprised that they'll be like, absolutely, I would love to be on your podcast, because they're that great and they're genuine. And sometimes you feel like, no, they're too popular, they're too famous. No, just reach out to them and just be genuine. Now, am I going to tell you that they're always going to say yes? No, they're not always going to say yes. Sometimes they may not even reply. Sometimes they may not even, acknowledge or whatever. But don't let that scare you, and don't let also that give you a bad image of that person. Keep in mind that that person also, aside from what they're doing on socials, also has a personal life. They have work, they have this. So sometimes it may take a while for them to even get a message, because that's happened before, where they're like, oh my gosh, like I'm so sorry. I know it's been a month or two and so on, and I'm just now seeing this or whatever. And they'll get back to you, so don't worry, and don't let that make you feel down. But always look for people. Don't always go for the big people right off the bat. What you want to do is, what I did on social media is, I was looking for people that I saw that were doing great things within my network, that I was like, oh my gosh, that's such a novel idea. But they weren't getting many like likes or retweets and so on. But to me, I saw this as like, this is amazing what you're doing. And so I would just like send them a message and be like, hey, would you like to be on my podcast? They're like, really? Like, but like they're like, I'm nobody. I was like, no, no, no. I really like this tweet. I really like this post. I really like what you had to say here. And I want to learn more about your perspective and your thoughts on this. They'll be like, sure. And then you just book them, and you find a time, just like you, Moses, like when you kind of got in contact with me, it took us a
I
while to figure.
honestly, I didn't think you were gonna respond right back
Yeah.
to, because you were like you've done so many podcasts and it's so like popular within the teacher community. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna take a chance, but I don't think he's even gonna reply. And when
Yeah.
I got a response, I was like, I was so flattered, and I was like, okay, I gotta believe in myself more, or like you never know, as you said.
Yeah, so that, and I love that, and that's the same thing that I went through. So you're always going to, excuse me, you're always going to get that initial kind of fear of asking people. But once you ask people, understand rejection is part of it too as well. Some people may not have time, or maybe they'll say, I would love to, but I don't have time now. Can we schedule for a later time? And that's completely fine, but don't put too much pressure on yourself, but like I said, start off finding and amplifying voices of people that are out there that maybe, like I mentioned, haven't gotten a lot of traction but are doing some great things. And then the more you do it, the more you feel comfortable with it, then you start putting content out, then you can start reaching out to more of the bigger people, or you can even start off with that too, start off with big people too. But that's just what worked for me. And eventually, the more you do it, the more you put yourself out there, people see you on social media, they see your clips, they see your podcast and so on, then there'll be a genuine interest in people reaching out and be like, hey man, like, can I be on your podcast with, do you need a guest? Do you need this or that or whatever? And then you can schedule that. But one thing that I always recommend, and throughout the show, Moses, I've been doing it, but you can always ask your current guests, are there any people that you recommend would be a good fit for my podcast? And then they'll be like, oh, absolutely, I recommend that you talk to so and so and this person and this person. And then you can ask, like, would you be willing to connect me? And they'll be like, absolutely, like, let me go ahead, and sometimes it'll either be via email or maybe just Twitter DM or LinkedIn and so on. But that's one of the things that I always love to do with the guests that I have, is I always ask, is there anybody that you would recommend would be great for me to invite? And now I can just go specifically to that person, and they've already had in contact. And then I can just say, hey, recently I was on Moses's show, and I wanted to ask you if you would like to be a guest on my show. And then they'll be like, absolutely, because now there's that connection. So things get a little bit easier there. And obviously, the more you network on social media, the more you network on LinkedIn, and the more you share, like you mentioned, genuine interest in that topic, and people will find it like, yeah, absolutely, I would love to be on your show, that you're giving these subject matter experts, whether founders, entrepreneurs, whether it's, professionals, educators, a voice and a place to amplify that voice. I think that's so powerful. And I think they definitely appreciate that, sometimes people want to be heard and they don't have a venue to be heard in. And so if we can provide a space for them, it's great and it's wonderful and it's magical anytime you have those kind of conversations like I'm having now. Like, honestly, this is probably the longest podcast I have been on, and I love it, but because the conversation has been so good. And as a podcaster too, Moses, I'm going to tell you one thing. The more you do this, when you do get an opportunity to be on the other side, receiving the questions, it is so refreshing. Like today, I have enjoyed myself because you've hit on so many things that I am passionate about, that I've been wanting to get out on my pod, or just to do on myself, like do a solo podcast on. But I thank you for giving me an opportunity and sharing your platform with me to be able to really just voice this, and now being able to get it out and get it out there in this way. So you're going to experience that too as well, and it's joyous because you get to be on the other side, sharing your expertise, your experience, your knowledge, and it's something magical, honestly.
You're such a kind person, seriously. Like, one last question, and then I'll let you free. A couple of questions very quickly. How were you always that comfortable in your podcast? Like, if we were to compare number episode 01 to episode 268 now?
Yeah, 68.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Like,
think,
do you feel like it's the more you did that, like the more comfortable in your skin you felt, or was there any?
yeah. Yeah, so from the beginning, going back to that, I think that I'm still the same as I was in episode 1, in that sense where Well, obviously, I feel a little bit more comfortable behind the camera now because it's like I already have my workflow. You do it for a long time, and I'm just able to turn it on right away and be like, all right, I'm on the show now. And then I get my podcast voice like, hey, everybody, welcome to another great episode of My EdTech Life, and so on. So it just becomes second nature. But the one thing that I'll be honest with you that I don't feel has ever changed is just my genuine, authentic curiosity about what people do, what their thoughts are, and hearing their story and their backstory and making those connections. I think to me, that is the most important part. And although I give it a little bit of time in the very beginning when I do the superhero origin story, to me, it helps me kind of make some connections and close some gaps in understanding where this person is coming from. And to me, I always like that first part because I always tell my guests, I want my audience to genuinely connect with you. I want them to know a little bit about your background so they can invest themselves not only in the show, but invest themselves in you so they can kind of see the thought process and your background as to what we're talking about, whether you're a subject matter expert on this topic or you're a founder. It really helps. And for me, that's always been the format. I keep it simple. It's origin story. We get into the main idea and topic, and then we always end the episode with my favorite three questions. And that's it. Keeping it simple. I always say I'm a big fan of the KISS philosophy, keeping it simple and streamlined. In anything that I do, it's always keeping it simple. And I think that that helps out too, just the simplicity of the conversation like we're having here now, like where you're getting genuine thoughts and you're getting genuine responses and just genuine reactions. Like me, like right now, like smiling because like I love it. Like it's almost like I don't know, it's great and it's a wonderful experience. So uh, confidence, yes, has gone up, uh, but again, keeping that genuine, authentic curiosity and wanting to know more about somebody, I think that's always been there. And I think that's always been there. And I'll be honest with you, it's very interesting because I am, I guess you could say, a social introvert. I don't know if that makes sense because I am very introverted. It takes me a while to really warm up to people. And so sometimes people can feel like, oh my gosh, like he's very conceited or stuck up or whatever. But it's just really me. And I think honestly, and I'm putting it out there, I think it's just a defense mechanism. And again, being an only child, and that it plays a toll on that too as well. That I'm very kind of closed off for a little bit, and then, but then once you get me going and talking, oh, I'll talk your ear off, and I'll listen. I'll listen as much as you want to share with me. I'll just sit there for hours just asking you questions. So I am slightly introverted at the very beginning, but once I warm up to you, like we're like friends for life. We're like I'm gonna be bothering you all the time, and so on. But yeah, it's like that's one of the things that I think I'll always be is that just very curious person that wants to know more about you because I always like to take those experiences and see how I can apply them to my life. Like your successes, I want to know like, hey, what helps you be successful? Well, now I want to take that and sprinkle it onto what I'm already doing to see how that can help me. So yeah, it's just that's the way it is. That's the way it's always been.
Yeah, but it's so interesting. Your personality traits actually, it makes sense why you're interested in technology. So you're curious. Podcasting, you're a social introvert. But if you were a salesperson as well, so it doesn't,
Yes, I know.
you know. And that's all that stuff actually cannot be replaced by AI because we're talking about AI replacing
Mhm.
people, but AI will never replace the human interaction that we're having right now. The personal brand that we're having. Every human being has a different personality, has a
Mhm.
different voice, a different everything,
Yeah.
right? So
I
so
wanted,
yeah.
well, real quick, I just wanted to add to what you just said because this came up right now when you mentioned that's something that AI could never replace. But if you think about it right now, with AI happening in this past year and a half, I think it's actually helped connect people more and talk more to other people because we're all genuinely interested in what other people think and are saying and so on. So in that aspect, I have and even on LinkedIn and people posting and being more social and talking, whether, like, hey, let's be cautious here, or hey, here's a success. Hey, here's things that we need to think about. Hey, here's things that have been working. We're connecting and we're talking in that at that human level too as well. So you're absolutely right. Like this genuine conversation and that storytelling and that experience sharing can never ever be replaced by any kind of tech tool at all whatsoever, and that's one thing that I love. But I just wanted to throw that in there.
But thank you so much. And well, I feel also flattered, and I would like to thank you for sharing your personal experience, your background, who you are, where you come from, your private life. You talked about how you grew up as a only child. All that stuff is amazing. So it was actually a dream come true to meet my one of the my how would I put it, my favorite podcaster, if that's a word, in the edtech industry. So thank you so much for being on. I really look forward to a part two, maybe. I know we've been talking,
Yeah.
you have been talking now 2 hours. No, but in the sense that, like you're probably too tired. So I'd love to have a part two to hear more about, like, go into details, more technical details on AI education in the States, in the United States, which is, I think it's a fascinating topic.
Yeah.
If you ever available in the future, but we can.
Yes, absolutely. I would love to just chat with you anytime, Moses. Honestly, this has been, I must say, one of the best experiences that I've had. I have been on other podcasts, and I'm not saying that that wasn't a great experience, but I think it was just something about today in the sense that I I just recently had connected with you on LinkedIn, and then obviously hearing a little bit about your story too as well. And I don't know, you just made, like we were talking about how you make guests so comfortable. Like you've made me so comfortable, so much so that I'm just like opening up myself like a book and just sharing things with everybody, which is great because it really, you're onto something and you're doing something fantastic and great. So I encourage you, keep doing it, and I will gladly be back for multiple parts at any time. And again, I also want to extend an invite to my podcast also as well. So right now, to all your listeners, I'm inviting you, and this is a formal invitation. We'll figure out dates and times and so on. But I would absolutely love to have you on my show also to hear about your perspective and what you're seeing in your area in France and neighboring countries as far as education, because I think that that adds value to what we do here to see how other people are doing it and not to be set in our ways, to always think outside the box and take what's best from what everybody's doing and seeing how we can mix that and add it, sprinkle it to what we might be doing well and things that we can improve. So, Moses, it's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much for this invite. Thank you. Thank you.